And I kind of just wanted to talk to somebody else about their opinions, maybe a little more in depth on, how they feel about those things from a different side. So, Emily, tell us a little about you. I think we're kind of interested to know one of the main reasons that I was so excited to have you here and be a part of this is because I know that you've been able to live in two different areas where it's very conservative, but also very open and democratic, I guess, if you will.
Democratic, liberal area, I guess I would describe.
So what would you describe yourself? Would you think that you're liberal, democratic?
I would go probably more on the liberal end. That's
Okay.
what I would say.
Okay.
So
how did that kind of come about? Because Emily and I met when we were 11. I had just moved back from Georgia to Oklahoma, and she had just moved there that summer with her family.
And she was still a strong liberal at 11, like identified as a. I'm joking. I mean, you're 11.
No, but for real, this is crazy. Really? Ask her for real.
So I think the main thing is, at first I was born and raised in Philly. I was raised in North Philly, so it's very diverse.
Yeah.
So I never really interacted or been in a group of people where I was the only minority or even minority.
Yeah.
So my perception of things, understanding of things was completely different than when I went to Oklahoma. I went to Oklahoma around what?
10, 11? Yeah, it was something like that.
So then I stayed there until what? 11th grade or 10th grade? 10th grade.
10th grade it was.
In Oklahoma.
Yeah. Wow.
She ended up going back to Philly in 10th grade, which I think was great for her. Myself at that time, I didn't really understand the mindset. I think that's something that's so beautiful about our friendship is that I learned so much from her, because I believe I told you last time that I had grown up very conservative. So it's like, I had this girl from Philly coming to the school, very strong-minded, very, hey, no, that's actually not okay. This isn't normal.
Oh, you were pointing out like inequities and inequalities in the school and shit that would happen at that age.
And it's like Obama was running and Romney, we would have like class elections and they would just go, oh, we were able to determine the last like 2 or 3 presidents of our last elections, like they voted Republican. They thought Obama had no way of winning. And I think that's when like peak racism started to come out a lot more blatantly, more abundant, more direct. Yeah. And then it was kind of brushed off as jokes and things of that nature. Because what I've learned about small towns and county sides, it's very like a bubble-like atmosphere. Yep. So what you live and you learn, and of course, the first thing you learn is what your parents know. They're gonna pass down what they know and give you kind of their values and what they believe in. And then you go in school, you make friends, you kind of determine your own. Yeah. So when you're going that route, you live in Oklahoma, everything's very conservative. But when it comes to politics, it's very narrow. It's like few things that they focus on. Yeah. And then those are kind of what majority goes overall. And then of course, there's not as much education in poor areas. But that's the same when you go to inner city. Yeah. Education about government and things that go behind it is really isn't there.
So what would you say your experience kind of growing up in Oklahoma versus growing up in Philly, just kind of on the conservative side, like what's kind of some of the stuff that you witnessed or you experienced being in Oklahoma, where in Philly it was vastly different? Yeah. Was there any examples that you have?
I think the Bible Belt factors in. So a lot of Philadelphia is very liberal. It's more of believing of what you want for the people, kind of having your rights to do and access to certain things, but it's also to a point of you care about others. So you care about certain systems, you care about there being foundations and programs for inner school kids, athletic programs and funding and food and things of that nature. Versus a Republican mindset is very individualized. So it's focused on I'm going to work the hardest I can to be the best I can, and it doesn't matter what other people do or hearing. So, and I think with Oklahoma's mindset, with the bubble, like when terrorism struck or things, a lot of it became very fear-mongering. And the fact is, they didn't know many Muslim people, or they don't really interact a lot of Mexican people or different type of immigration, because they think immigration, they automatically think Mexican or at the borders. And that's nowhere near the case. And they think they're just coming to steal the jobs. And it's a lot of it's being uneducated about what's really happening and living in that bubble and never really looking past that bubble.
Yeah.
Because they don't know
because they haven't met
else.
people or seen the other scenarios. Because when you're in Philly, you're gonna meet a lot of Muslim people. You're gonna meet a lot of Mexicans, people who are documented, undocumented, and different stories and different backgrounds. Because it throws you into a pool of everything's mixed in.
Yes.
So you get to experience a lot more. But versus Oklahoma, you get to see how people are sheltered, how they get the media, how they're raised, and how the education system is, and how it kind of, I think it's more propaganda.
Yeah.
Of how we fit into how America is so great, and this is why we're great, this is why capitalism is so great. It really drives in on what we've learned in school. And then if you don't go past their higher education outside that state or outside a state that's very conservative, you don't learn any other viewpoints, and it leaves you very narrow-minded and susceptible to like understand what's really happening.
So I do have one more question, before we kind of push it forward about just your background. Would you ever say that, you know, just in the short couple of years, I don't want to say short couple of years, but you know what I mean, when you came back to Oklahoma and you were there for those couple of years, do you ever think that there was a time where you may have considered yourself Republican?
I wouldn't necessarily say Republican, but I would say I cared about taxes,
conservative,
or not necessarily about individual things like abortion. I've always been pro-choice and things of that nature. Guns, I don't mind guns. I just do think there needs to be more control and more restrictions.
Yeah.
I think they're very too accessible. I think mental health is a big thing, but as Republican-wise, I can understand the need for taxes and being upset about them when you see how much is taken out. But as you kind of get older, you see how much like I'm taxed compared to someone who's making multi-million dollars, or versus even breaking over 140 grand, and you're not really taxed as much for like Social Security and things of that nature. And you're like, wait, so I make more money, but unless you're making 140, which is a very high number for a majority of like median households, unless you break that threshold, then you don't really get a benefit. You just lose a lot of money. So it hurts more to people in our level and middle income. And then the rich just keeps getting richer.
Yeah.
So I would say like I had more inputs about taxes back then and strong opinions maybe against it. But as you get up and you realize what taxes contribute and how it all works,
same.
Depending how it's laid out, I do think you're beneficial.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, do you have?
Oh, for sure. Which we're about to dive into that because you actually brought up something that I'm really excited to talk to you about in just a second. But before we get to that, did you have any questions about maybe her background or different ideals that she's had growing up, JD? Or
not really. I thought she was gonna lead in when you were talking about like the East Coast welfare programs and stuff for helping people and helping community. Like Republicans, then I feel like they attribute helping people only to religion and Christianity. Like you can't help people just because it's nice to help people.
Yeah.
And like it has to be like a calling by God, or I don't know. That's a big difference I realized from the South.
It's almost like performative.
Yeah.
So like they say they want to help people, but look at all the ice storms that happen in Texas and Oklahoma. Who really opened their doors and provided help? Mm-hmm. And then people, like when we go into homelessness and programs, like people bash LA, like look at all the homeless there. They don't take care of them. It's overrun. People aren't homeless all from LA, and that's the population. The population comes from all the other states because they don't have anything.
There's no other resources.
Mm-hmm. So they're going to flock over here to at least get some assistance, some kind of help.
Resources, absolutely. And that's something that I feel like where you had spent some time growing up and where I was raised is something that was they would make it seem shameful almost if you wanted to get help from your community or like
community programs, they look down on community programs like we shouldn't enrich and better everyone in our community.
Like it's a bad thing.
They look at the poor and they get disgusted by looking at the poor. And I think it's from the fear of them.
Yeah, it's definitely fear.
That's what I was about to say.
It's definitely fear.
Like, they get upset about that, but they don't realize that most of you are considered poor. You're making below poverty wages, but they don't want to accept that. They think it's disrespectful almost, or I'm not poor, I can pay my bills. Well, you're living in one of the poorest states in the country.
But the thing is, you have one medical crisis, one accident, you can literally be homeless tomorrow.
Literally to anybody. It could literally happen to anybody, and they don't want to accept that.
But yeah, that's why they're afraid. They see that a homeless person, and they see that could easily be them with one slip up. So it's the hate in themselves for not being able to get out of the hole. So they push it onto them.
It's like they're looking into a mirror, essentially.
Yeah.
It's your
And they don't
reflection
like what they
coming
see.
out.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not easy to see them as human. You want to dehumanize them. So you
Exactly.
don't feel guilt or need to
And you feel
assist them.
better about yourself
Yeah,
as well.